Are
All
there
right.
really two?
How are you,
Yeah.
everybody?
Oh, okay, there we go. It's a
There we
day.
go. We're back. Special event. Is today the second Monday of the month? I think it is. So we're back for book study, book conversations. We're back to better conversations. Um, Today we'll talk about chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3, listening with empathy. Chapter 4, fostering dialogue. Uh, it's going to wash out in my screen, but you can see from the notes and the post-it notes in my book, I really am liking this book a lot. This book is great. A lot of good little nuggets of insights in here as we go forward. So I'm excited. Hopefully everybody else had the book and you had a chance to go through it. Um, I am going to offer it to the group. How would you like to go forward?
I'm really enjoying it because I feel like it's mirroring. I went through the cognitive coaching training. It's like a 7-day intensive a couple of years ago. And it was
Yeah.
very, very powerful. And I feel like it really changed the way I work as an instructional coach. And this is like a really nice companion to what that work was. It's mirroring it a lot. It's just bringing up a lot of good reminders before I go into some timely conversations.
What was something, Darla, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. What was something that resonated with you, a takeaway from either of these two chapters that you were like, yes, that's right.
I think the whole listening piece, and that was a big thing for me when I went through the cognitive coaching. They do a nice job in that course to really emphasize when you're working sort of in an itinerant role and you're doing any sort of coaching that it's taking off that pressure of you don't have to go in and have the answers for everybody. Your real role is to get them to start to come up with their own solutions and their own answers. And I think just that permission piece of don't go in with your plan, go in and really listen and listening with empathy. Because, and I know that, I've heard you talk about this before. I've heard many of you talk about this before, that if it doesn't fit into the teacher's life and what they're willing to do or comfortable with doing, it's not going to happen anyway. So just that piece of listening with empathy and figuring out what can you do to help support that teacher, which in turn will then hopefully really help that student.
I think that's excellent. I think that as I read these two chapters, the things that kept coming back to the front of brain as I was thinking of is kind of along the lines of that, Darla, that idea of, I think for many of us, I'm not sure if all of us, but for many of us, we are in and out of situations. And so we're constantly, I always feel like I'm trying to find ways to build a relationship fairly quickly so that I can provide some help to somebody. And I think what's really interesting is I think thinking about these two steps in these two chapters here could go a long way to doing that quickly for the people we're working with. That idea of being a listener and not a forcer. I wrote into one of my notes here and I loved it. It said, don't be a talker. And I always in my head think about stop talking. Just stop. Don't talk. Don't say a thing right now. And I think that was a really powerful reminder in there is that, thinking about how you move through something. One of the things I really liked was one of the reflective question pieces that I wrote it down. I wrote myself notes so I would make sure to really think about it. It was, it was in the workbook. It was about fostering dialogue. And one of the questions, I loved it. It was so great. And I'm being a talker, I know, but bear with me for a second and then I'll stop talking. It was reflect on your conversations and think about how many minutes did you talk? How many minutes did you listen? It's really great because I think I've said this to everybody here in the meeting before and something else. When I write these professional goals for myself every year and put them in my Google Keep right at the top. It's like, do these things this year. And the one that stays year after year is talk less, listen more. And I just put that up there anyway. And this was a good reminder of that, like a very tangible, if we're talking for a half hour, how many of those minutes was my mouth moving? How many of it was I just sitting and listening? And so I think it goes along to what you're saying there, Darla. I think these kind of reflective moments of doing that, and I loved it.
A couple of years ago, when I was going through that other class, I asked some of my team members to come and observe me while I was doing coaching conversations. And I asked them to take data on that. I wanted them to write down exactly the clarifying questions I was asking. How many questions versus how many suggestions was I giving? And how much of the conversation I was steering versus the other person. It's a humbling exercise to put yourself through.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. They keep reminding us in the book about this idea of recording yourself. And that's one of the things I've not really done that much. And I really think I'm going to try to find some ways to do that. Because I think
They
you're
also
right.
mentioned that in the book. I got that book, Fierce Conversations.
Okay.
And they also mentioned that in that book too. So
It's such a
Yeah.
great idea, Mary, right? This idea of you might have a perception when you're in it that you're doing these things until you see yourself removed from it. And you're like, well, wait a second, that is not what I thought was happening.
right.
Or asking someone else to do it, Darla, very bold move, asking others to give you that feedback. I think that's really great though.
I used some pretty safe team members.
Yeah, right. I agree. Right. You
Whatever.
find the people. Yeah. Yeah. Kelly points out you could look back at some of the recordings of the town hall. I could, I guess. So she's saying specifically me, to see talking versus listening. Kelly, I think I'm still struggling with it. Talking versus listening. I'll get there.
So
Don't say it like that,
it's
man.
interesting because, I mean, I have had what I would call a tremendously unsuccessful year coaching a school district that hired me this year. Like, I've never been more frustrated and at a loss as to being successful. Now, I have to say, most of the coaching that I've done in my career has been ongoing coaching, not momentary, has been face to face. Like, I've been a school-based administrator, I've been a central office administrator, I've been, where I've gone out, where I've worked, and had opportunities to develop relationships not in a digital environment. And I think that might have something to do with it. But I'm also feeling like, I sort of just, I have to say, I did sort of just throw my hands up and give up. And I'm not usually that person, but I got so frustrated. I think a large part of it was that these were people that were told to participate in something they didn't choose to participate in, and they were told they weren't given, it wasn't based on a needs assessment or anything like that, right? And I wasn't hired to do that part of it. I was hired to do training on emergent literacy, and it was like, I did a full day training, and then we had monthly check-ins that was supposed to be like coaching conversations. And it was like pulling teeth. Like, first of all, they weren't mandatory. So a lot of times people didn't show, or not many, but even the ones that showed up consistently, it was like pulling teeth. And I feel like I tried to apply some of these, but then I ended up like, if nobody else is talking, you have like, it's like, I'm like, yeah, I talked way more than I should have because nobody else would talk, right? Like, it was so hard. So there was obviously a lot of other things. And like, another book I really, really, really love is called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And we were obviously not a team, and we didn't have trust, and there was not, right? Like, there was not any of the layers of that. And if I had to do this all over again, I think I would completely restructure this. I'd ask for a lot more input from the stakeholders, which wasn't an option at the beginning of this. But it's interesting reading this, and all I can think of is these would be good things. These would be good things to do. I just don't know how I would have done it in this setting. And that I'm totally like, it's totally like it was totally like what I ended up doing was the opposite of what good coaching is, because I was just at a loss. And I am not a person professionally that feels at a loss like that very often. It it was a very humbling and disturbing. I dreaded this hour a month. Dreaded it.
That
dreaded
could
it.
that could have been your shared experience with them. Be like, look, we're all dreading this, right?
I dreaded. I mean, I ended up going finally back to the person who organized it for this, like for the last one that was supposed to be last week, and I ended up with a conflict. And I said, I don't, I said, I said, I owe you some time. There was supposed to be a whole nother hour a month that never evolved because for a variety of reasons. I'm like, I owe you some time. Think about how you want to use it that is going to be more effective, because I honestly don't think this was effective the whole year. The initial thing might have been fine, but I have no sense of what they did with it because they were so unparticipatory. And I guess they just viewed me as their expectation for me every month was to be the expert giving them a presentation every month. And that was not what I wanted to do. And that was not what it was supposed to be. Right.
Just not
So
aligned.
it was interesting.
Go ahead, Mia.
But
Jump in.
I'm reading the book. I'm like reflecting like, the things to do better.
Don't you think that's hard though sometimes, Beth, when, especially in your role, if people do see you as an expert, I mean, you are, there's national recognition there. So when you are pulled in, I think it's sometimes hard on that coaching role to switch back and forth between consultation versus coaching and trying to figure out if you don't know those people very quickly, are they looking for you just to tell them what to do, or are they really wanting to be vulnerable and let you know what they're struggling with?
Yeah, they weren't, we didn't build opportunities for vulnerability. And I think I have to go back to my 5 dysfunctions of a team and look at, even though we're not technically a team, because it was like a large group, that how could I have built some trust at the beginning so that they would be more willing to take risks as we were going through.
Yeah, it was a literacy improvement type thing.
Yeah, I mean, I did a full day training at the beginning of the year on emergent literacy for augmentative communication users and other students with significant disabilities. And then it was going to be a monthly check-in, like, what have you tried? What's worked? What do you have questions about? Like that kind of thing. And it was like crickets, right? Crickets, like the most painful hour a month. Seriously, like, and I have worked with I've worked in person with struggling teachers where it was, I never like, this was the worst professional experience I've ever been involved.
You know what's
with.
great, Beth? I have to cut in because you can tell who's had these experiences by how hard Mia's laughing, I'm laughing, and Darla's laughing.
Yeah.
You can tell we've been in those.
I was just like, I'm like, oh God, like, I mean,
How
I've
many
had
people
I've had
were,
on plans that we ended up like taking to dismissal, and it wasn't as painful as this.
how many people were in the group?
It was like 50, and you get like a handful of them. In the original group, it was like a large group. And yeah, so
Because
Beth,
I was thinking maybe if you split it up like they do on building thinking skills and put them into random groups or whatever groups they want, and then have them discuss
Yeah.
what they want, or use breakout rooms, or
a lot of things that could have been, and again, when we did the monthly thing, I'd have like 3 or 4 people, maybe 5. Like it was such a small handful. So, but I agree with what Kelly said. I don't think the administrator, like who reached out, like it was a strange thing, like administrator who reached out to me and wanted to hire me. And yeah, I think it would, in going forward, I will be having those conversations with the administrator that's contracting with me much differently in the future.
and then when you use breakout rooms, you can use like a Jamboard, and you can you can do like 8 Jamboards at a time. So
Yeah, those all would be really good strategies, Mary, for sure.
yeah, and then just kind of like look at it, and give them, you know what I mean? It's like they
Right.
got to start talking.
Yeah.
Right.
And a Jamboard is a really good way to have people not not feel put upon because it can be anonymous and all of that. And we
Right.
did a little bit of that. So yeah,
All right, Mia, jump
gave
in.
me food for thought.
So Beth, we were put in a very similar situation with a whole school for one of the districts we serve, where we were called in and we were told you need to do, like, basically this is what we want you to do. And as a state project, oftentimes we can't say no, right? But luckily, the writing was on the wall with as far as, like, what do we call it? The coalition of the willing. We were going to have an entire elementary school. Nobody was the coalition of the willing. So,
Like that
And
term.
so-
I need to write that down. Where's
oh,
my-
it's right. Like, like, I don't know, like if anybody goes to like church or to, to synagogue or any kind of like religious something or other, like you are either in the coalition of the willing or you're stuck, right? You're stuck and you can't leave. And so those are the two people that you will always have in any audience, right? And we love the coalition of the willing, but more often than not, we get the people who are a captive audience, right? Captive audience coalition of the willing. It's one of the two. So anyway, the principal asked us, they were a failing school. We were told to come in and actually do a presentation on one thing. But luckily, we requested, and hindsight is 2020. In our case, we requested to go in and do a walkthrough of the school. We said, we're not going to do anything until we walk through the school and see what's going on first. Well, in the walkthrough, what we found out was that walkthrough, just one walkthrough, we found out that they had like 5 different initiatives every single year, of which the initiative only lasted a year. And then they were supposed to be like doing, I know, right? And you've been there, Mike. They were supposed to be doing all of these initiatives, all these new initiatives for 1 year and then continuing to. So we were able to sit down with the principal and I literally was like, here's the deal. Like, so yeah, I saw that comment going in there. Darla. Yeah, so what I literally said was like, this is what I'm feeling. Whatever we're going to present on that you want us to present on is not going to happen. It's going to be, dead in the water the first minute we open our mouth. And we were able to convince him to let us do a problem of practice exercise with that entire school in their teams, in their grade level teams, and have them just like talk about it. So that was, we just got lucky. You know what I mean? We literally got lucky that he said yes. And you can't imagine what came out of those problems of practice per grade level. Like, it was incredible what came out. And we gave all of that information. They obviously did all the talking. All we did was guide them through it, that problems of practice. And we literally gave that entire Google list of, here's what they're saying. These are what they feel like they can't control. This is what they can control. And out of what they can control, this is what they want to happen. Like, that they couldn't help each other with, because that's how the problems of practice, goes. Like, it's what, what ideas can, it's been my favorite for a seriously, it's my new favorite phrase, the coalition of the willing. I love you, Beth. That's so funny. But problems
Wrote
of
it down.
practice
It's
is
like on my sticky board.
yeah, no, it's great. It's so powerful because they do all the talking. You're just leading them, and then you find out what their issues are. And then they try to solve their own issues. And then what can't be solved, then you give that to the administrator and you go, that's what you need to offer, because this is what can't be solved for them. Anything else is just going to be captive audience, and ain't nobody going to be making any kind of whatever, blah, blah, blah. So
And
yeah.
what's always so hard about something like that, Mia, and you said it, and it's so true, is you got lucky that an administrator was going to be willing to let you do that path.
Yeah.
And that's so unfortunate, because how many times have people had that contact person shut that down and say, well, no, I just want you to do this, regardless of whether anybody wants it or not. We're going to do this. And, you
Yeah.
know, you get in there and quickly realize this, whatever that was, is not what people want.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Mike. We really got lucky. It was
Yeah.
the timing, it was everything. It was, you know, this was before COVID, you know, so things were allowed to be done a little bit differently,
Mhm.
right? But I think also like, and I wonder this, Beth, and I want in your situation, and maybe Darla, those of you guys who get contracted out, I feel sometimes like we have a little bit of power, not a lot, a little bit of power to kind of, you know, massage the situation in the sense of like, hey, you're going to contract me to do this thing, right? Like, I understand that this is what you want, and you know, of course I want to work for you. However, knowing what I know now, and Beth, I know that's a situation. Knowing what I know, here's my boundaries, right?
Right.
And yeah,
I will have a completely different kind of a contract and understanding. And I have the luxury
right.
of, this is not my full-time job, and when I
Yeah.
do, it's bonus, right? So I have that financial luxury, and this is not, you know, my ability to pay my mortgage is not dependent on me getting that. It's a nice extra. It paid for the wedding, it paid for the, you know, all of that stuff. I think, you know, like what Kelly said in the comments and a few other things, I will dramatically, and learning from this book, like that these are some of the things that I will build in, like these kinds of coaching conversations are going to be a part of it, having an agreed upon, the participants agreed upon desire to right? Like there's got to be some buy-in from them.
Mhm.
And this kind of evolved out of, they said, oh, we'd like to have you come and do a one-day training, or, you know, a 1 or a 2 day training. And I was like, well, and that's the seagull effect to me, right? Like, you know, Kelly Suding talks about that, like fly and
Exactly.
drop knowledge.
It's a
and leave,
drive-by. It's a drive-by
Right.
training. Yeah.
right? And I didn't want to do that either. And I was like, what about if we structure this with, you know, the full day training and then a monthly check-in? And so it was right, like I had the right intention, but I needed to have built it out more, like what that was going to look like and what that would look like and I guess it's the kind of thing where I would personally have been so enthusiastic to participate on that, if I was on that side of the teacher side, without understanding that not everybody is.
So
there.
Beth, you're leading me right into something that I wrote, and it's so true because it's exactly that scenario that you just said. It was from chapter 4. It's all about dialogue and things like that. And the book references Made to Stick, the book Made to Stick, and talking about, and I had forgotten all about this, and this is a huge sticky on my book right now. It says the struggle is real, and it is the curse of knowledge. It's that idea that once you know something, it's shocking to you that others don't either know it or agree with it in that way you would do it. And you can't even understand how some people might not want to do that. Because I agree with you, Beth. You described that. I'm in. What, we're going to talk to each other every month and we're going to do that and we're going to follow up on those things. That all sounds awesome. Yeah, I'm in. Like, why wouldn't someone be into that? And it goes back to that curse of knowledge, which I love. Alyssa, with your hand up, please jump in.
I'm in my car, so I didn't
was
want to
just
just
about to
unmute.
say, Alyssa, are you in your car? So there you go.
Yes, I am. So I think, like, building on what both Mia and Beth said, I think that you have to almost have the opportunity to gather the right group, right? So I've done that asynchronous training and then meet once a month, you know, to do the kind of coaching support for them. And it worked really well because the people that were there had a clear understanding of what that intention of that time was. And it was like, they would join from their car, they joined from their kids' soccer practice, they joined because they knew what was going to happen there met kind of the way that they processed that information. And we had people that participated in the asynchronous course but weren't really super engaged in that monthly Zoom face-to-face. So I think it helped that they knew ahead of time that was like the intention of the meeting, so that it wasn't a surprise to them kind of how we broke it out. And I think they benefited very much from it because it worked for them.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree, Alyssa. Again, it's a lot of that. That goes back to a lot of that prep stuff and being on the same page and thinking about what Mia said before about sometimes having the power in this situation. There is an opportunity when you're connected with these people who reach out and they say, we want you to come in and do X, Y, and Z. There is an opportunity there to say, that all sounds good. What do you see? How do you see this happening? How do you see it moving forward throughout the year? In my experience, here's strategies that have been successful. Here's ways that have been successful. And you do have a little flexibility in that, very little. Ultimately, me as someone could flat out say, hey, I just want to pay you to do this. Are you interested? And like Beth, there, if you have the opportunity to be like, well, no, that doesn't really interest me. That's not the way I feel like that would be best suited for me. If you have that flexibility, well, then that's one thing, but otherwise you just kind of go through it and you find ways to make it work for people, like Alyssa just said, and like we've been talking about, this idea of finding that common ground, listening to them. I just like the idea of, I think as you went forward, just using even some of the terms that we're learning about in this book as you have those initial conversations. Like I, as a trainer that's going to work with you, I believe in this concept of a dialogue with people. Not just a one-way sharing of information, but a dialogue. Now, I recognize that there are some places that just want the expert to drop in magically, solve a bunch of stuff, and then just drift away like magic. Hook a cord to my harness and just haul me out the roof and I'm gone. But instead, we can have these conversations about what do we feel is most important. Alyssa with the hand raised, go for it.
I know, you always know when I'm in my car because I'm super polite and I don't just unmute.
It is super polite, and I keep lowering your hand so you can re-lower it because I know you're in your car. So I'm trying to manage some of that for you. Go ahead.
So I think that's why things like when we did our pre-conference, we send out that survey to people ahead of time. And I think that's something that even within my own district, I've started to do more and more and more of, even if it's a like requested training, administrator says, do this training, I still want to get feedback from the people, whether they are a captive audience or whether they're willing participants, so that even if it is you have to train on this, there are still ways you as a trainer, a professional development provider can like sneak in places that meet the needs based on that like pre-training survey. It is hugely valuable to get information. And sometimes it also tells you what the barriers are going to be straight up. And I think that's super helpful as a provider to know like, what am I walking into?
Right, because if you're surveying people beforehand, Alyssa, and you don't get anything back, that's telling you just as much as if you got a whole bunch back. I mean, I think that's also setting the stage for that. That makes me think back to, if you've ever read it, the Accelerated Learning Handbook, and it has those 4 stages that they talk about.
Yes.
I love it. They talk about preparation, presentation, practice, and performance, the 4 Ps. And this idea of setting people up to acquire new information, acquiring new information, phasing it into their practice every day, and then following up to see how it's going. And I think those are really good kind of 4 steps that kind of keep us in mind as we're working with people, whether it is, even if it is a one-off flyby training, you can still incorporate some of that in. And I know I'm notorious for just checking in with people, even if that's not part of the contract. Like, hey, in 3 months, or here's a Jamboard we can all participate in. Here's a Padlet we can all participate in. So even when we're done and you feel like this only happened for one day, know that I'm still lurking around somewhere, not in a creepy way, but just lurking around in a positive, maybe a creepy way, but in a positive way, in a positive way. That's a creepy way, what Mia just did. So if you're watching, And she's just gone. Very good. Let's see, Mia. Some people just have a brick wall mindset. Yeah, I read this. That's it. I'm full. Thank you. I'm good. Right? Those people, like, they're just not interested. What else? Oh my God, I love these conversations. I put all these stickies in my book, and then we just have a great hour-long conversation anyway. Barely get to any of it. Go ahead, Darla. What do you got?
Well, I was just going to share something that I tried differently this year, was to ask my admin to not attend one of the PD series that I'm doing with our SLPs. We had some work to do with AAC, and we are really, well, I am really trying to shift into more of a literacy, instruction, writing focus, and I'm following Alyssa's book study online. And anyway, I mean, this was birthed organically, where teachers were coming to me and saying they wanted to talk about it, and they wanted, but I knew they have a monthly SLP meeting, like they have opportunities to talk about this and dive in, but I knew they weren't going to do it with a certain administrator in the room, or they weren't going to be very honest or telling about what they were struggling with, or even offering up ideas. So I just went to one of my administrators and said, look, I want to do this and I want to provide this for them, but I don't respectfully want you there or anybody else on our admin team there. And I think it's been really shocking and amazing to see how much further we are getting in our conversations and what they are doing for each other when they don't feel like somebody is in the room that is judging them, or whether that's warranted or not. Like, I know that's how some of them feel, and that's made a big difference. And I know that I can't do that with everything that I'm offering up. But those little opportunities where I see it could make a difference. And I just feel like when you're I know I'm a little bit different than some of you guys, where I've just got one school district and I'm kind of that middleman between our teachers and admins sometimes, but to kind of seize that moment and opportunity sometimes and say, I'm going to get done what I know ultimately you want to get done, but it's going to go better if you're not sitting in the room for it.
Darla, two questions come to mind, and I'll probably forget the second one, but the first one is, how did that administrator react to that? And was that someone you had a good relationship prior to that ask?
I would like to think I have a pretty good relationship with all my administrators.
Good answer. Great.
I will say that I have one administrator in particular that I think she believes she has good relationships with many people, and I know in reality she does not.
Mhm.
And so that's always tricky, right? Where
Yeah.
like, I don't have any of you guys ever read that. I think it's called 365 Leadership, where you talk about leading up, leading across, and leading down.
Okay.
And that was a book I read quite a few years ago that I have to kind of go back to that sometimes when I'm dealing with some trickier people, to remember, like, I have an opportunity to lead up to those admin that are in charge of me. They're my bosses. So I was a little bit, I specifically went to one boss first to talk it over before I went to the other boss, because I knew that that was going to get my foot in the door and go a little bit smoother. And yeah, so anyway, I mean,
Yeah,
I
good.
think again, like talking about this empathy and relationships, like I'm just in a position where I feel like I have to have it all around me. I have to have it up and down and across. So that takes some time to build that rapport. But I feel like 2 out of 3 have been extremely supportive, and please let us know how we can help moving forward. And if you do ever want us to show up, or if there's something we can do, let us know. And the third has just kind of stayed out of it. And really that's been for the best.
It is interesting though, because you're asking them to have a lot of trust that things are going to go forward in a better sense without them there, but really because of them, in a sense, because they wouldn't be there. But getting people to understand that and buy into that and say, sure, okay, I'm up for that. Alyssa, go ahead.
And I think if you've got good relationships with like that 1 or 2 administrators, this will make Mike smile. It's like gathering that first follower, right? Like pulling that admin in that you know is going to be on your side. But I've also had it where, you know, I've had them come in the very beginning, like session 1 or the intro, and kind of just like give the participants the, like, this is really important and we're supporting the work that you're doing here. And then I have them disappear until the very end where we're kind of doing the celebration share out. These are all the things, the discoveries and aha moments, and pulling them back in, whether it's, you know, everybody's attending virtually or they're getting a copy of everything that's shared out, because then I think it gives the participants permission to like really dive in without an administrator like standing over their neck, but they also realize they've got admin support for this thing that's happening.
We would, I mean, that's interesting because when I was school-based, we would, as a school-based administrator, and even as a central office administrator, we would have our first line of support for somebody that was identified as struggling, be from a peer instead of a supervisor. So we had like, so somebody that was not in an evaluatory capacity, right? So like our staff development teachers or our program specialists who were same level, right? They were not they were not evaluative. They couldn't, you know, they didn't have, but they had training around supporting staff and having that so that there wasn't this automatic feeling of being judged by somebody who's writing your observation, your evaluation, who has that power, like somebody who has less power. And then we would take, you know, things would evolve from there. Like, could that just be the support they needed? And that was great. And we didn't have to, you know, we would just come back in to be the pat on the back, like, oh my God, I'm so thrilled with like the changes that you've made. This is fantastic. Instead of, you know, having to be that person. And so I think that that's kind of that, what, like you were talking about, Darla, like that leading from the sides, right? And
Yeah.
encourage and giving those individuals that thing. And for us, it was also a way of building leadership skills in those people. Like my former school district had a philosophy around building leadership from within by giving people those types of opportunities, right? Because that's how you become an administrator, right? Like those are the kinds of skill sets that they're looking for. And you don't just develop those skill sets in a vacuum of having that. So yeah, that's like a very, both what Darla and Alyssa said is, you know, through the lens of that school administrator that I still look at things often from that lens. So, you know, making sure that you're not overpowering something as the administrator or the expert or the whatever. And it kind of goes along with the idea in the book about powerless speech, which I haven't quite digested, or I need to. So I just put in I'm about to put in the chat. There's a TED Talk that I have not watched yet, because as I was reading it, I was like, I'm having a hard time, like feeling like I could own that language. It's I understand the kind of the concept behind it, but I'm like, I need to dive into that more. But where you can kind of not have to be you're not the, you know, you don't have to be the best at everything or whatever. You don't have to, it's that idea of like, you're not necessarily always the expert. You're adding some, well, I don't know if I really know what I'm doing or not into it, which is, I think it's something I would have to work on, which is why I want to watch that YouTube on it. I need some examples of it more.
Beth, if I hear you right, you're talking specifically to that whole Dunning-Kruger quote about that experts have the greater experts, like they actually, when people are experts, they don't feel like they know as much or they can talk to it as much. Whereas people who know little will talk about everything.
Yeah.
And that too, but I think it's also like the section in the book about speaking tentatively and the powerless speech or powerless communicators. Like, so it's to speak in a way that display vulnerability through their use of hesitations and disclaimers. I like the idea of displaying vulnerability. I'm not yet sure that I understand how the specific strategies that they mention do that. So I need to dig more into that. I like to not, I want to show vulnerability. I'm just not sure how I feel about what he listed as ways to do it.
I struggle with powerless speech also with that exact part of it. Is I think there is a fine line between powerless speech and being perceived as ineffective. There's a very fine line there, and I struggle with that a bit with that, and just where do I sit on that line, and how do I sit on that line? I'm going to check out that TED Talk, which I haven't looked at, so
Yeah.
I'm going to look at
Not
that.
Is ineffective, because I'm actually kind of okay with not being perceived as the expert all the time, but more like not being like not having any confidence in my own ideas and thoughts.
I think some of those hesitations,
Kind of
my fear, you know, you know what I mean? I think some of those hesitations, I don't want to see a perception that there's no value to the team to having me there as part of your team. Not to necessarily be the leader of your team. That's not the point. But finding that balance of just powerless enough, which diffuses the, hey, there's an expert sitting over there, because you do want that. Like, I'm all for that. I want that to go away. But finding that balance of, well, that guy's not an expert, but he's a buffoon that's only going to drag us down like a weight. I got to find some balance in there somewhere. And how do you make sure that you're drawing them in? And I think some of those powerless speech strategies are really effective. Don't you think? There, I just did one on you. I just did one to you. There it is. Bringing those in.
Don't you think? I could use it, don't you think? I just like, this may be a bad idea. Like, there's got to be other ways to phrase it than.
I don't even mind that. I actually like that.
This
Like,
might
you
be
know,
an
this.
untested idea, or
Yeah, Beth, you commented on my comment. I just feel like this is a very white, no offense to you, Mike, but this is a very white male centric statement and strategies, because as a white male, being the person, you know, on the power and privilege circle, like the one with the most power and the most privilege, it makes sense. But then when you go and look at that power and privilege wheel and you start to see who holds the least power and privilege, like as a woman, it makes you woman and any marginalized, like to say anybody. Yeah, in Charlotte, I see you shaking your head, right? Anybody that's disabled, female, marginalized, any kind of marginalization, it makes that group of people seem less competent, because that is a position that we've been put in for so long. So I think, Beth, that's when you were talking, that's what I heard, was like from a female / any, like, then add all of your marginalizations on there. For us, it's trickier. And so, I mean, you know, it makes sense for Jim Knight to say it that way, right? Because, you know, Jim Knight, I guess in a way it would be nice if he just specifically said it like that. Like, from my position as a white male, power and privilege, these are strategies. However, if you are someone marginalized from a marginalized community, or do not have the power and privilege in that position, then these might not be the best ideas for you, right? You might have to like look at that. And that's, in a weird way, that's why I like how Brene Brown handles it, of that idea of vulnerability and leadership. Like I tend to like kind of, I go to her for that. But that's a whole nother conversation. And I think it was great that you brought it up, Beth, because it definitely is thought provoking.
A lot of times I'll say, I don't know the answer to that yet. Like, that's one that I'll lean into, like, asked a question, I don't know the answer to that yet, or let's find that out together, or, but I think I know who I can ask, or, you know, those types of things. So showing like I'm, you know, that I don't know everything, or as opposed to, but I had not even thought of it from that perspective, Mia, and I think that's a really good perspective.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Mia. That really is good. And it leads me into one of those reflective questions that I write great on the edge of my book here. The question to ask yourself, will what I'm about to say open up or close down the conversation? That comes up a couple times, and I was like, wow, that is really a great question to ask yourself as you're reflecting through one of your interactions. I love that. That's the first thing I wrote on my little note card is things I wanted to say today. So I just thought that was so powerful. As a good listener and thinking about where the group is at and your active participation within that group and finding your spot. Awesome.
I think too, also there's a consideration if you're looking at these suggestions. Nicole Tucker Smith wrote an incredible article about the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'll find it.
Okay.
And DEI, right? So diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
And oftentimes when we're, and Charlotte's probably read it, I see her shaking her head. Oftentimes when we're talking and coaching through something, diversity, equity, inclusion is always kind of like woven in there.
Mhm.
And what's interesting, what she says in that article basically is that people have major Dunning-Kruger effect with DEI. They feel like they've gone to one training and now they know diversity, equity, inclusion. They got it all. They don't want to hear anything else other than that. They know it all, which is it's just so fascinating, right? How that's all woven into how we even approach, different groups and, and diversity, AAC, everything, like it's all interwoven. So it's like I almost want Jim Knight and like someone from like Nicole Tucker Smith to kind of like write a book together so that we can kind of like, have these considerations when we're looking at, how we approach the coaching from that angle. I don't know. So there you go.
It is interesting. You made me laugh, Mia, because I put a proposal into a DEI conference about technology for people with disabilities and inclusion and all that. And they wrote back and they said, that doesn't fit the theme of our conference. And I wrote back and I said, this is the theme of your conference. I'm the epitome of your conference at this moment. Well, no, we're not doing things about disability. I was like, well, then you're not doing what you're doing correctly then. But another story for another day.
And no, but DEI is a huge thing. And like, we there's a group of us that did EdTechquity. Like we were part of the anti-racism SIG for UDL. And so we presented EdTechquity, but like we have granted it's all female, but we have just a very diverse group of women and we're approaching it from all different angles, including disability, including, all of it, like that power of, that power wheel. And that was the whole point is like tech. Yeah. Like you can't forget diversity, right? Like you can't forget disability and diversity. You're absolutely 100% right. And a lot of times one or the other gets left out and that's frustrating. And I'm going to stop talking. Thank you guys.
Yeah, no, that's true, Mia. It's definitely a big and powerful thing. Disability does sometimes be put on the back burner, especially in history and so forth and other things like that. It's even being brought up now over with the college that I graduated and the one I'm doing the commencement from. And it's really a big thing. They have a whole like week on it at the college. So, and yeah, disability, equity, and inclusion, they have a whole week on it. They have things where they do like a hockey team comes over that's made out of people with disabilities and so forth like that. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlotte. That's awesome. Very good. Other thoughts as we start to move our way towards the top of the hour and wrap ourselves up? Something else that someone that resonated with you as you read through these two chapters, something that you're going to take with you and try to implement as a change?
There was something that I came across that I thought was really powerful. They talked about the need to have super authentic conversations where you want to give your true opinion and you want to give your true take on something, but also keeping that open mind of listening to what the other person has to share. And just as thinking back when we were having this part of the conversation about you're seen as the expert, you have this opinion, you want to kind of shake people and say, oh, stop doing that. And I feel like that's something that I'm still working towards, to be true to my own beliefs and yet still be open to what other people have to say. And I think in the past, I've tried to handle it in different ways, or tried to backdoor some information, try to backdoor people to kind of trap them into getting to the place that I want them to be. But then I'll witness some of my peers handling things that way. And to me, it's so obvious what they're doing. And I'm like, oh my, do you really think that they don't know what you're doing? Like, you're making yourself look worse right now. Like, they're going to leave here mad at you than they are thinking that you're on their side of anything. So that was just something that I'm still kind of thinking about. And I would love to hear anybody else's tips or sound bites that they use when they are trying to give their true take on something, but not shutting somebody else down. And I don't know about, like, something that's really big for me right now is this Gestalt language processing. And that is such a conversation with our SLPs right now. And I've got people all over the place with it. And I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around what my opinion about it is. And I don't want to be seen as somebody who's stuck in the past and not open-minded to new information, but I also hold some things to be true and evidence-based practice. And so anyway, that's that's just a little tangent about when I was reading this, that got me thinking about that. And how am I going to do that? How am I going to do that moving forward? By letting people know that I have some beliefs and I want to share those, but I'm not closed off to hearing new information.
I think that's really, really good, Darla. And it made me think, I flipped to the back of that chapter 4, where we talk about fostering dialogue. And it says, to foster inquiry, we should be humble, listen with empathy, open ourselves to new ideas, and surface and suspend assumptions. That's kind of wraps up exactly what you were just saying, that whole idea of being a good partner in this conversation. I think all of these things we're talking about are conversations, whether it's a presentation or some kind of consultation. It's a conversation is what it is. And I think that's what really struck with me in this reading of these 2 chapters, is this idea of I'm going to be more deliberate in my use of the word dialogue as I start explaining things to people about the things we're going to be doing, because I think that word, we always talk about that idea of words have weight. And I think that word, to me, just had a lot of weight as I was reading this. I was like, yeah, that's a word I want to get into my vocabulary and use. So be prepared if you're talking to me. I'm going to drop it in. Because I think it's just really, it has a certain kind of power, and it says something about what that person can expect from the interaction you're about to have. And I think that's really powerful. It was great.
Mike, you said it was be humble, surface and suspend assumptions, and what else?
Yeah, so it
writing
was
down.
Be humble, listen with empathy, open ourselves to new ideas, and then surface and suspend assumptions. Yeah, really great. That was the end of the 4th chapter there, the summary of the 4th chapter. Really good. Thanks, Beth. It's good seeing you. Good talking to you.
I think it's a balance between I always try to remind myself, because I can be inflexible, so flexibility and and accommodation.
I think that's good. That idea of that flexibility, Mary, I think is so important. That's part of that empathy piece. It talks about consider others' thoughts and feelings. Like, where is someone else at? I know where I'm at, or I think I know where I'm at. And it's one of those things that I know where I'm at the beginning of our conversation. I don't know if that's necessarily where I'll be at the end, and that's good. That's a good thing, but I know where I'm coming in at. But where is someone else coming in at? And are 2 expectations for that experience aligned, or are they completely off? And how's that going to impact how we go forward? I just had one of the teams we've been working with for one of my grants for the whole year. We had a meeting with the team, and they came to the meeting. It was a virtual meeting. They came kind of bummed out. They were like, we don't think we've gotten anything done this year. And we're like, oh, and so we started talking. We're like, well, just what did you tell us? Like, what's been going on? And they started slow and then picked up speed. And before you know it, we had a list of like 15 things that team had accomplished. And I'm like, well, for the group that hasn't done anything, let me recite back to you what you just said you accomplished this year. That's pretty amazing. And you did do that. And I think it goes back to that moment of getting lost in the bigger picture and not appreciating the steps forward that you've taken and reminding them that they have had success. Watch out, Darla. Mia's calling you out in the chat. She just wrote Darla. I don't even know what that means. It's just she's calling you out.
I didn't mean to do that. I was just going to say that kind of what she was talking about. I've struggled with people doing things out of compliance.
Yeah.
And not out of like, because there was like, that intrinsic need, right? And so like you talking about backdooring it and how do you do it? It's sometimes it's just, I just wanted to say that I feel you on that, like, right? Because you don't want it to just be compliance. You don't want them to just say what they want, right? Like, you don't want them to just say it to you like, oh yeah, I got it. Sure. Yeah, I got it. And then they go back in the room and do.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't consider that a win when someone just parrots back what I want and then walks away shaking their head. That is not a win in any way, shape, or form. So I would rather work towards some active solution to it. Go ahead, darling.
I was just going to say one of the coaching questions that I've tried to incorporate as much as I can is to look at the person I'm speaking with or look at the group and say, what do you hope to get out of this? Or what do you hope would change? And what would make this better for you? What would give you the good feelings as a teacher? Like, because I feel like in a lot of situations we're talking, so I anyway am speaking so specifically about a student or a system or something that's happening, and a piece of curriculum happening in the classroom, and we get really in the weeds about what's good for a student or what's good for, what the district is telling us to do with instructional practices. But I really feel like that sometimes, well, it can go either way. What I've seen happen is right away the teacher can tell you like, here's what I need and here's what I want. And then that opens the doors to, some real action in some areas that can make things better. Sometimes you see them pause and they cannot tell you. Like, then you can tell that their wheels are turning where they're like, I don't know. I don't even know what I want out of this. But that also opens the door to a different conversation of, then what are we doing right now? Like, what are we even working towards?
And you're right. And that gives that opportunity for that. And that also makes me sad at times because I sense that person's never been asked what they want.
Yes.
And that bums me out when that happens. But again, glass half full, it's an opportunity to give them an experience that really matters for them and say to them that kind of thing, Darla, like, hey, why don't you sit and reflect on it? And let's connect in a day or in 2 days and let's talk about it and come up with a plan together as we go forward.
I think sometimes you see a real emotional response to that question. Like you can tell it catches people off guard sometimes. And then, especially if it's somebody who's in a very vulnerable place at that moment, you can see the tears, you can see the panic. Again, it just sometimes it takes you down a rabbit hole of something you were not even there to address, but you probably weren't going to address what you were there to do anyway, if that stuff is all kind of bubbling and lingering in the background somewhere.
Good stuff. All right, everybody, we did it. We stayed later. You get extra credit today. Great job, everyone. I hope that this is good. I hope you're all enjoying it as much as I am. I feel like we are just from the conversation. It's a great book. We will be back. I don't know. I should have that written down on my little piece of paper, but I don't. We will be back on June 12th.
Can you
talk
put the
about the
link
next
in
two-
so I can just do it right now? Thank you.
You want the link? Yeah. Wait. And I know Naomi just jumps in. I'm going to go search for it. I know she's going to drop it in there, but I'm going to do it anyway because I don't see her dropping it in yet. So give me a second. Did she put it yet? Because now I can't see you guys. June 12th, we'll do the next 2 chapters. So that would be chapter 5 and 6 of this book. So let me find you. June 12th. Here's the
And are we
actual.
still gonna do one that's on AT certification routes and discussion? That came up
Yes, we're still
during
gonna do that on. Let's do that on the 5th.
It
Listen,
says June 5th on your website.
Yeah, June 5th. June 5th, we'll do that one. That talk about certifications and things like that, and we'll do this on the 12th. And then we will take a break for the summer. We'll only come back to do the next 2 chapters in July. If you're available, great. If you're on the beach somewhere, that's cool too. We'll still have a conversation. final thoughts before we go back to work? Solve all the world's problems? All right. We'll solve the world's problems, everybody. It was great seeing you. Great conversation. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Naomi. Thank you,
you.
everyone.
See you, everybody.